To introduce myself, my name's Deyrick Allen. I'm the MD of a company called IOT Horizon. As the name says, it stands for the Internet of Things. We've been very lucky actually during COVID, because IoT really does sit in most industries, as per the current slide, whether or not it's a connected car or something that you're doing in medical, in terms of perhaps temperature monitoring or smart buildings. And I'll cover some of those areas and how I think it can help to reduce carbon. So next slide, please. So if we try to define what the Internet of Things is, and Peter on the last call was saying it's quite hard to define, and it is, but we talk about the holy grail of being able to attach any device in any sort of context, in any sort of place of the world, through any sort of network, to service to anybody or anything. And if you think about that, look at some examples at the moment. Aeroplane engines are not being sold as capital items, they're being sold as air miles. You see Microsoft moving towards SaaS models with Office 365. I remember my days at Hewlett Packard, and we looked at SAP on demand. So the ability for us now to connect to our machine, to learn more about our machine, to know more about as a manufacturer, you'll know more about how your machine operates than perhaps an end user. And therefore, if you can connect to that machine in real time, how will that help with new lines of revenue? And right now, everybody's looking, working online, Teams, Zoom. You've got operators that have been sat at home, not being able to talk to production, and that's the opportunity, I think, that IoT gives. If we move on to the next slide, please. So we talk about it being the power of now. And if I give you an example, it's very hard. I have a saying. I say, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So people say, I've got a problem, but if you're not measuring it, how do you manage it? In a business center where I was previously, we put a sensor on a storage heater, and we gave them insight data that they didn't know. The storage heater wasn't coming on at the right time. 200 storage days later, they reckon they were able to save £10,000 and 30 tons of CO2 a year. So sometimes you put a sensor on something because you've got a problem. Maybe your machine is rattling too much. But actually, the insight data that you might get, you never knew at the beginning. So it's quite insight, and how you utilize that data is becoming very, very important. If we move on to the next slide, please. So here, if we talk about measuring the carbon footprint of your supply chains are becoming very popular at the moment. You look at some of the Freeport status, goods moving in and out, especially with the concerns on consumables at the moment. I've been in the smart card industry for 20 years. Some of the chips that go into smart cards, perhaps for banking or access control, some of those wafers now, the chips, are on back order to 2022. So getting hold of parts is becoming very hard, not just the price of steel, but also parts. So actually, how are you going to manage that supply chain? And how are you going to make sure that it arrives at the right time? So we talk about IoT technology in terms of, what are the new possibilities? What are the new lines of revenue? How do I capture better data and carbon footprint on that supply chain? How can I work out where that supply chain's going? And that sometimes you'll see terminology, things like the last mile, very important in automotive. They may need to see some parts down to the last 20 minutes from an OEM supplier. How do they do that? Well, unless they start putting low-cost trackers in it, they're going to find that very difficult to do. And that's some of the opportunities that IoT can do, so that we know where those parts are moving. Brand protection is really important. If you read Forbes recently, they estimate at least 10% of all pharmaceuticals products are counterfeit. Same could be said of the alcohol industry and some automotive parts, where they're not genuine parts. So again, if you look at the implications of not managing that correctly, not just the impact on your brand, but also the impact on not having the right parts to fit a machine, can be quite detrimental. And the last thing is investors. Companies like us, when we go for investment, are all demanding that we've got a sustainable angle, and that we are looking at how do we make our technology more circular by design. Go on to the next slide, please. So if we break that, if we think about the three areas of a truck moving around, first of all, you've got better decisions. Health. If you think of foodstuffs at the moment, so much food is wasted because we don't know its temperature, its humidity, or its moisture. There's technology now that can give you that real-time data. So if you think about a tracker in your car, the same tracker in your car could give you environmental data, and it could have a battery that could go into your supply chain and give you real-time data on that. And some of the IoT networks that we're seeing now is making that more affordable. So in the past, you could only ever really send data via 3G or 4G. Now there's a lot of choice. And I think some of the challenges for some of our clients is trying to work out which route that they should go down to. If you were putting goods onto the truck in the middle, there are IoT technologies, camera systems that you can put onto that truck to make sure that it's optimized, correctly. Have you got enough boxes on there? Has it got the right distribution? I looked at a business case with a logistics firm where we think we could save them £16 million a year in terms of moving their goods around. And it was not just around the UK, but also around their own warehouse. They were losing goods, they couldn't find goods. Quite staggering, really, when I looked at that. If you look at transport planning as well, and I mentioned obviously parts going, into supply chains. How do we know what transport systems we should be using? And again, lots of people are starting to look at how you put sensors onto that. Things like wayfinding and things like that. Your mobile phone, for instance. Lots of people don't realize this, but lots of people leave their phone trying to find a Wi-Fi network. You can use that data to, in a random way. You don't know who they are, but you can start to capture that data. So if you were, a retail organization, you wanted to know your footprint, put a reader by your window and see how many mobile phones go past it by tracking someone trying to find a Wi-Fi. And again, you could use that for all sorts of use cases. If we move on to the next slide, I'll start telling you a little bit about smart buildings. And I've done quite a bit of work in this space, having been involved in the access control market. The UK and Europe are investing, hundreds of millions of pounds in low carbon initiatives for smart buildings. Next slide, please. And why are they doing that? Well, the government obviously made a commitment to, reducing carbon emissions by 80% by 2050. If you look at the energy consumption of a building, 40% of our energy requirements are for our buildings. And we also want to move to climate neutral by 2050. So getting a handle on smart buildings and utilizing and how IT can help you to do that, I think is a definite area in terms of helping to reduce carbon footprint. If we go on to the next slide, please. If you look at the wellness certificate, why would you do that? So let's say, for instance, your building, we're starting to measure air quality. And it's getting quite popular now, something called COVID. Lots of people trying to work out how they can mitigate the risk without having to always open the windows. At least know if you're measuring CO2, for instance, and you're at 1,200 parts per million with your sensor, then for every 50 breaths you breathe, you're breathing in someone else's air. So that's probably, within a dashboard, within some software, you could alert operations to that effect. But the other side of that is obviously at 1,200 parts per million, your people aren't able to operate as well as they could be, probably at 60% of their brain power. So there's a big move now towards making sure that, our buildings, when we do go into our buildings, that I get a return on investment. And I think, the new norm of working from home, some people will go back, some people will stay at home. I think people are going to demand that when they go to the office, they get maximum their return on investment. So have you got the right air quality? Is the temperature okay? What's the humidity like? And there's some really good data on that. Next slide, please. If we look at the other benefits of smart people, people working from home. Imagine you're working from home now, and you're a salesman, and you've got a manufacturing plant, and the customer says to you, "Where's my order?" In the past, you may go down there. You may have been able to walk down the factory and find out that, but now you can't. So how do you do that remotely? And a lot of companies are struggling with that. So this is where you started to see things like MES systems coming to the market, which are giving you real-time data as to where that part is in production. And that can have all sorts of benefits from a low carbon perspective, because now you're starting to see how efficient you are in terms of making parts. You know, are there any trends from, you know, working, you know, different shift patterns? You know, why is Deyrick better working on a specific job than Darren? Is there a training implication? The other side of it, obviously, is improving health and safety. You know, you can start to see where people move and where they go. And of course, you know, sometimes we do as humans, we make errors. You know, I was working with a man guarding company, and they've got, you know, guards that are just checking paperwork, and they'd rather have them doing something else. You know, how can we improve the automation there? And we've talked a little bit about supply chains, really. So lots of benefits in smart buildings. Smart metering is the other side of it. There's also looking at other sort of, you know, ways of how you power your devices, and I'll come on to that in a minute. Next slide, please. If you look at carbon, you know, so if you look at a lot of the devices that IoT will create, there is, you know, some staggering stats. People throw out numbers, you know, trillions of sensors by a certain amount of time. It will require a lot of power. You know, there are units on the market though, PoE systems that can power some of these devices, you know, using EV during the day and then cheaper by night. I looked at, you know, if you were putting in an access control system now, I'd ask you to consider, you know, having perhaps, you know, some smart software. You know, if you set the fire alarm of your building, you know, and you know, sorry, not the fire alarm, sorry, you set the intruder alarm of the building, so you shut for the night. Why can't the access control software turn off the mag locks of your internal doors? Why do they need to be powered on? Why does the Wi-Fi need to be on? So again, when we start looking at, you know, some of the savings there, some of our systems could be that maybe our software is just not smart enough. It's not joined up to BMS systems and things like that. And that's another thing that IoT can help to bridge gaps between a lighting circuit, an access control system, or a BMS system. And let me show you some examples. So next slide, please. So lots of people are looking at BMS systems. These are things that are you know, taking, you know, LiDAR of your building and putting that into what we call, you know, a digital twin. And if you look at how we now looking at buildings, this allows you to do things like virtual tours. If we take the chamber, for instance, you know, if I wanted to look at the chamber without going there, how can I go online and walk around the chamber and see the different parts? And I'll show you an example in a minute. Next slide, please. So we've done some work recently around augmented reality. So you've gone around a tour of a building, and we've actually integrated our sensors into that. So imagine you're going around your building or your venue. Actually, you can start to see live sensor data, and I think that's where you'll start to see a lot of savings. Is, you know, how do you enrich your customer journey to make that dashboard or that system more? And I think with BMS systems joining up to IoT systems, there's a huge amount. Let me show you some examples. So I'm just going to play a video next. If we can go to the next slide, please. I hope this is going to work. Here we go. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. So that was a digital twin of our lab in STFC over in Liverpool, and when you were walking down that corridor, you could see my office. So that was a very immersive digital twin. Yeah, and it allows you to really engage the consumer. If you go on to the next slide, I'll pick out 4 areas. Next slide, thank you. So, so if you go, so first of all, the one before, actually, if you don't mind going back one, Chris. Thank you very much. So first of all, we had a virtual tour. So that yellow line was taking you around that building, and that was all in a digital environment. And when you got up there and you turned left, that was a picture of our office. So the first thing you can start to do is to show people what they're going to be seeing. So if you think about the carbon footprint savings of that, I might need to go to visit your building or your operation. You might be able to bring that alive. If we go to the next slide, at that point in the video, I don't know if you noticed, but here we're now starting to look at health and safety. So within the digital twin, we can start running a health and safety program and showing you where certain attributes are. And we can make it very immersive. If you notice, there was sort of clicked on buttons and you could find on more. So from a health and safety perspective, if you take fire risk assessments, if you're able to track your people around a building, in near real time, which we can do now, you can then create what we call hotspots, and you can then put that in your digital twin. That means a fire safety officer can see where perhaps he's going to have a problem if there's a fire system. We go on to the next slide. This was in that part. That is a 3D printer, that Darren was talking about earlier. That one actually prints aluminium, and in that room we've got a sensor that's reporting temperature, humidity, CO2, and particulates. And the use case for that was actually they're putting aluminium fibers into this, so it's probably a good thing to look at particulates. But also there was an application for looking at the state the raw material was going into the 3D printer and whether or not that affected the quality of the product. And here you've got a dashboard. So within that digital twin, as you're walking around, you can go to a machine and you can see the real-time data of that machine. So this is where IoT is joining up with digital twin technology in near real time. It's a very exciting area. If we move to the next slide, and that's what it looks like. That particular sensor is off the shelf. It comes with its own network. There's no SIM. You plug it in, and we're up and running. Very quickly into a dashboard. I was fascinated. I was glued to I was almost trying to work out when people are in the room based on their CO2, based on CO2 in the room. And also I could work out that actually, why are we heating it to 26 degrees when there's no one in the room? So you can start to get some real interesting data and feed that back to, energy officers to say, well, why are we getting a handle on how we heat these buildings? If we move to the next slide, please. Something to watch out for is energy harvesting technology. So in that room, we've also got one of these sensors, which is doing temperature and humidity. And this uses a different form of Bluetooth, so which uses very low power. So it's got photovoltaics, it charges itself. But the battery lives on these will be like 5-10 years, if not longer. And the line of sight to if you think about a gateway, could be 30 or 40 meters. And again, so some of the sensors also could be self-powered as well. We move to the next slide, please. The other thing to consider around IoT is preventative maintenance. Where I've circled there, that's an off-the-shelf sensor that measures temperature and vibration, and we can put that onto a bot motor. And one of the advantages of IoT into the carbon is that if we're now connected to a motor, and a motor might not be very expensive, a bot motor might be £150, something like that. But if that's running a very expensive CNC machine, and it's running the coolant or something like that, if that goes down, that can be a very expensive piece of equipment. Now, typically to sensor up something like that would have been in the old days quite expensive to get all the wiring out there, the electricians. But now the ability to put an off-the-shelf sensor onto a piece of equipment connected by a Bluetooth to a gateway and then into some software is doable. And even if it allows you to look at a proof of concept and a dashboard, it should get your engineers thinking about how you can start to see the benefits of preventative maintenance. Because if I can get to a machine and I can repair it before it fails, then obviously there's a carbon footprint of not having to replace the machine, engineers to site, and. I'm sure Darren could give us the figures for that. Next slide, please. And again, the same gateway that's measuring or monitoring that machine could be monitoring your person. So here we have, and this is in the software, that this is a real-time sort of Google map of your office, and you can see where people are congregating. You can create policy violations as well, so people are going into the wrong room for health and safety reasons. But again, it's a great way of looking at the return on investment of your building. Do you know by department, by room, your utilization? Because if you don't, how are you managing that building? And I think lots of people will be wanting to do that. And technology and IoT exists now. You're not reliant on a smart card anymore. There are wearables and things like that that can give you that information. Next slide, please. If you go to the chamber, you're lucky enough to go to the chamber, you'll see that middle image, which is a makeshift gate with a lock on it. And here we were demonstrating the art of a special key. That key can be updated using your phone, Bluetooth. So you could have that key in the middle of Timbuktu and give someone authority to open up a lock. What does that mean? From a carbon perspective, it means that potentially you don't have to go to the office to pick up keys. So what we're also seeing is a simple thing like a key. You can give it an identity. You put power into that key, it's still got a mechatronic lock, but the key then can suddenly talk to a phone or talk to a lock. And actually, if you go into the padlock in East Lancs, you can actually put the key in there and you can interrogate the padlock, and it will tell you, who was last in that padlock. So it has some opportunities for things like, pharmacy and medical, and helping nurses and people like that. Instead of having to find the keys, they just carry their key, and you've got a nice audit track. Next slide, please. So this is we call it IoT full stack. In IoT Horizon, we've got 4 areas. One will help you with the business case validation. Don't spend 2 or 3 years trying to work out how to do it. Let's work with experts, and there are plenty of people around to help you do that. Look at the business case. Why are you doing it? What's the benefit? What's the new lines of revenue likely to be? You'll need a platform. You'll need to find the right sensors and electronics. And you'll also need product design. So this is what we're about. And next slide, please. And I'll leave you in peace. Apparently that's based on me, that one in the middle. But if you're that person sat in that boat trying to fish, find the right person that can help you really fill that, that fish up. I've seen people spend two years trying to look at how to crack IoT. Find the right people that understand that have got some background in software and sensors and control systems. And there's lots of people on this call that can help you as well. So next slide, please. That's my details. If anyone would like to have any further conversations or have any questions, I shall take them now. Thank you very much.
That's fantastic, Deyrick. I do have a question, and I actually probably can answer it myself, but I'm going to let you answer the question because I know the answer. And it's from Eugene. Utilities will love the padlock solution. Who was the last one in and left a mess for the next person to clear? Eugene, I'll answer with Deyrick. Me and Deyrick have had many discussions about this. How it would work for United Utilities, that it will work for housing associations or local authorities where many people need to enter a property and you don't know who's going in and when, and they can have one generic key that you allow access to, and they can go, and then you know how long they've been in there, you know what they've been doing. With the smart technology, you can see what they're doing. If you've gone to fix the toilet seat, it's take the bin in for 15 minutes, they've done the toilet seat, they've uploaded the picture and so on. It makes invoicing for maintenance work a lot easier. There's a whole host. And as Deyrick alluded as well, you've also got the hospital. So if you've got medical medical cabinets around, you can make sure that certain nurses only have certain access to certain cabinets. If you've got
Darren, around nurses hide assets. They'll sometimes hide a pump or something because they need to find it later on in the day, and sometimes they can spend 40 minutes looking for keys. And it can be really problematic. In fact, I know one business case where they looked at it and it almost funded 2 nurses a year by the time they looked at the return on investment. So definitely, but the key message for me on that is, if you can give an identity to a key, you can probably give an identity to anything. You know, I joke with you, don't I, Darren, when I see you about my bank card. My bank card is a ring on my finger, you know, and I pay with that. You know, your card that opens your building, you know, has been shrunk to a grain of rice. You know, so the ability to give something an identity is that. I was talking to someone around supply chains, you know, an A4 piece of paper, and they've actually put a sensor. You know, we've got some certificates where in the actual paper we've got NFC technology, and again, you know, you can then start to get maybe a better return on investment on that side of it as well. But no, thank you for. You should have done the pitch, Darren.
Yeah. Oh, well, I have got one thing, and I will add. I'm waiting for the time where I'm wearing a device that monitors my health and says, I need a bit more vitamin D. I've looked in your fridge because you haven't got any kale, but your menu says you're having pizza tonight. I'm going to cancel that order, and I'm going to order you kale in and change your menu for your dinner that night, your online menu.
Yeah.
And it turns up, and then if what have I got kale? And I look at my online menu and see that I'm losing vitamin D. You're right. It's so many things that could be interlinked. It potentially can be scary.
But yeah, but the first thing to do is look at the business. Why are you doing it? What are the new lines of revenue likely to be? Before you go ahead on looking at, you know, at technology. But the use case you just said there, you know, look at what Amazon are doing now with, you know, you walking in and just taking what you want, and then you're getting an automatic billing. You know, you look at Decathlon and how they utilize RFID technology. So as you put it in, it knows what you put it in there, you know, and the same RFID is not just improving your customer journey when you go to the till, but it's also helping them do all their stock management. And again, you know, we'll be showcasing some of this technology in our lab so people can see, you know, is a barcode the right technology? And if I do put RFID in, how will that allow me to count things quicker? You know, if you're spending 4 or 5 days doing this, you know, a stock take, you know, as new technologies come on board, how can you automate those processes as well? So, no, thank you, Dan. Are there any other questions?
I have another question. It's anonymous, but that's okay. Are there any user cases where people have used data to reduce the amount of building companies have? I suppose that's probably very prevalent now when a lot more people potentially could be working from home, so the buildings are underutilized.
Really good question, and I'd have to dig out a case study, but I do know of a bank down in London that went from 3 buildings down to 2, and I think it was multi-million-pound cost savings, and their occupancy was about 43%. Now, how do you measure your occupancy, and how do you then challenge different departments like marketing or operations? And how do you do it down to individual rooms? The only way you do that is by utilizing IoT technology. So if for instance, you have an access control system and you just put a door access on the front of your building and nowhere else in your building, then you just know someone's gone in the building. If you gave somebody a wearable, and in each of the rooms that you have, I know that you've been in that room, I can then capture that data. And that is doable now. Then all of a sudden you will get those metrics. And whoever said that, if they want to get in contact with me, I'll show them how we do that. And you can see your utilization down to a room by department. So yeah, more than happy to try and help with the case study if someone gets in touch.